Yeah, this is Pete A. Turner from the Break It Down show, recording this intro standing up at LAX, and it is packed. That is the power of the Zoom H6 and my Shure SM35 microphone. Bam. Tactical, portable, mobile, high quality. Today's guest is just like that. Chief Warrant Officer Joe Garland was a counterintelligence agent that served with me in the 165th MI Battalion. He's also been a badass 82nd Airborne Division warrior. That means he's an airborne spy. Think about this. You can drop Joe in behind enemy lines and he will find things out that he is not supposed to find out. Not many jobs in the world are cooler than that. And when you're that cool and when you're that tough, people like Delta Force come knocking and they want you to help support their mission. Today's episode has Bryan Fuller, also a tactical airborne combat spy from the 82nd, and myself and Joe Garland. We're going spy versus spy, talking about the ins and outs of tactical collection, what these careers look like, and a little bit of reminiscing too. As always, you can support us at breakitdownshow.com, Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Deezer, everywhere you get podcasts. Just do me the favor of rating, reviewing, subscribing. That's a big help. If you want to help do something else, share. Every time you guys share the show, it makes it bump up in the algorithm. That's really a great way to support us. If the content is good, do me the favor and click share and just say, Pete's latest show. That's all you got to do. That would be a big, big help. And as always, I want you guys to support Save the Brave with me. Every month, I contribute money in. All we're asking is for a small donation. Subscribe. Do $10, $15, $25. If you've got it in you, we will put this money to work and literally save lives. Now listen, saving lives, that's what Joe Garland does, but he does it behind enemy lines. And he's today's guest.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey, this is Joe Garland, and you're tuned into the Break It Down show.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
So we do these spy versus spy shows where I bring in people from my past who've worked in counterintelligence or other intelligence fields, and this is one of those episodes. Joe was the warrant officer that would yell at me when I would walk into the ops room and tell me to do a better job. and joining me, it's another one of the guys that would walk in and get yelled at by Chief Garland. Is Bryan Fuller. Bryan and I had go back, all the way to the mid-'90s, so it's been a long time. And Bryan's been on several times. By the way, Bryan is going to row a boat with some friends across the Atlantic Ocean sometime in the next year or so. So Bryan is always doing big things, and I appreciate you, Bryan, for coming on the show and chatting with Joe and I.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Love being on the Break It Down show. It's always good stuff, good conversations.
Bryan, you don't ever remember me yelling at anybody, do you?
Joe, I don't remember you yelling, ever raising your voice ever. Honestly, you would just stew a little bit, and everybody knew you were pissed off. Not raising your voice. Not a big raise the voice kind of guy. Just sort of.
All right. I just want to make sure, since Pete said I yelled at him.
Well, you yelled at me,
not like
for sure. The spy world is described by movies primarily, but it turns out there's a lot of us that do a lot of different things, and it takes a lot of different folks doing a lot of different things to get done what we have to do. So we've had Jeff Felmet has been on the show. Monday's episode was Eric Kleinsmith. So when we're recording this, it came out at the end of September. We're in October now, and now we got Chief Garland on to talk about the job and how we do it, and just to kind of check in and do some old time funny business. Now, so just so you guys know, Joe and Bryan go way back. They worked in the same section. I was lucky enough to escape, and they have remained pretty close over the years. At one point, Joe put Bryan in charge over a guy who outranked him. So you know what Joe thinks of Bryan.
or how little he thought of the other guy.
I think it was a little bit of both. And to be honest, the irony is that I've actually kept in contact not so much with Bryan. I mean, we were communicating when he was getting ready to roll back in, I think it was 2012.
Yep.
But I actually went out and visited Mitch, the other guy that we're talking about. I went and visited him this past July. My wife and I flew out to Seattle to spend some time with he and his wife.
Oh, how is he doing?
So he's doing real good, man. I've actually, like I said, you two are about the only ones, with the exception of maybe Eric Kleinsmith, that I've actually had some contact with or kept in any bit of contact with. But he's doing real well. He and his wife, there's an island just outside of Seattle, the downtown area of Seattle, and he and his wife live on the island.
Huh.
With their 2 kids.
Wow, good for him.
Yeah.
Wow.
So go ahead, Pete. Sorry.
No, you're good. This is what we do. When I show up, I'm just an E4, brand new in the military. I don't know anything. And then you were working with the infantry regiment, right? You were with Echo 51st when I first got there. Is that correct? Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from the Break It Down Show, checking in real quick to ask you this. John, Scott, and I all support Save the Brave with our time, our location, our effort, and our money. Each month we give a small amount. Do the same with us. Go to savethebrave.org. Click on the donate tab, pick an amount that you want to come out each month, and they will handle all the rest. I stand behind these folks. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the show. And then you were working with the infantry regiment, right? You were with Echo 51st when I first got there. Is that correct?
Yeah. I spent a year over there as the intel tech for them. Part of the reason why is because I had come from the 82nd. I spent 8 years at the 82nd and a year with 2nd of the 7th Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg. So I was jump master qualified, and at the time, Colonel Vivon needed some jump masters over in Echo Company, so that they reassigned me to Echo Company.
Right. And then were you always intel before we encountered you?
So my career started when I joined the military. I was infantry. So I spent the first 4 years as an infantry guy. Yeah, I was an airborne infantry guy at Fort Bragg. Then when it came time to re-enlist, because I had a pretty high GT score, they said, well, you can do anything you want to do. And so I found this, counterintelligence thing, and I went for it. And at the time, we had a counterintelligence company in the 82nd, and they only had like 2 people in it, because most people that went counterintelligence didn't want to be wearing a uniform and jumping out of a plane, right? They wanted to be in civilian clothes doing strategic things. So I ended up, even though I went CI, I ended up getting stuck at Bragg for another 5 years because Branch wouldn't let me leave.
Interesting.
The only way I got out of Bragg is to go Warrant. And once I went Warrant, I wanted to go back to Bragg, and they wouldn't let me. So
your friend wound up taking over the brigade. Did you wind up going back to Bragg after that?
No.
Oh, okay.
So when I finished Warrant Officer School, I went straight to Germany.
Right. Okay.
And spent 6 years in Germany.
I saw you, Joe, like my last day, I want to say I was at Bragg. Right. And you said a friend of yours who was a full bird, I don't remember his name.
Wayne K. Davis.
Davis, that's it, Colonel Davis.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
He was taken over from the previous guy who wasn't very good.
Yeah.
He called me into his office on your recommendation and asked me to. I told him I did not have a good time at Bragg. It's a little twist. There was not a young lieutenant, an older lieutenant switched over from NCO to lieutenant who really enjoyed just ribbing everybody pretty hard. I told him about that, and I heard through the grapevine that lieutenant found his way out of the military shortly after I left. I don't know if that's true or not.
So Bragg was one of those places that you either loved it or hated it.
Yep.
And it was best if you went there early on in your career rather than later on in your career, because it was like being in basic all the time, right? I mean, it was constant, getting dropped. You could drop for push-ups, and everything was about. It's like being in a Ranger battalion, right?
Yeah. No, I agree.
And so it was a struggle if that wasn't the environment you grew up in. But likewise, it made it hard to leave the 82nd and go to some other unit that wasn't that way. I found myself getting in a lot of trouble when I went to a 902nd unit in Turkey because I'd spent 8 years at Bragg, and now I get sent to this 902nd unit in Turkey, and everybody's walking around calling each other by first names and, long hair and putting their hands in their pockets. And it was a struggle for me.
Let me give the audience some clarity on what you just said right there. So in our world in counterintelligence, you can be a lot of things. You might be a lie detector guy. You might be someone who wears a suit and works with diplomats, that kind of thing. There's a lot of different tasks you can complete. And we're sort of expected, until at some point you kind of pick a channel and you stay in it, but we're sort of expected to be able to do whatever. So Joe went from being a hard push-up doing infantry, like in the home of infantry, not technically because that's Fort Benning, but airborne units, he's at the home of that in Fort Bragg, to being in what's called a strategic office. And there's not a lot of command around. You're really just more of a team. And so, you wear suits and you're accountable to yourself in a lot of ways. It's a totally different environment than, hey, your boots aren't tied right. Start pushing. And you're like, God damn it, now I got to do push-ups again, And you could easily do 1,000 push-ups in a day at Fort Bragg by just walking from A to B.
Right. And so just like Bryan didn't necessarily have a good time in Bragg, it's because he hadn't been in that environment to start. And you
get me wrong. I liked Bragg. I thought it was a lot of good fun there. The only thing I didn't like about Bragg is I had a lieutenant that, I don't know. I did one really bad lieutenant, and like he made who's a terrible captain we had there, Norwood. He made Captain Norwood seem like a nice guy.
Wow, yeah. That's horrible.
He made Norwood seem like a nice guy.
But it's situations like that rooted out people that could have had an otherwise more successful career.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask Bryan, because I know, speaking of Captain Norwood, he came in and said, this deployment to Bosnia will not stop careers. It will not curtail things and everything else. And Bryan led the way for the two of us to put in some OCS packets. And he had called back to Germany and figured out from Bosnia that it would take us approximately 48 hours to run around and get all of our stuff done in Germany that would allow us to put our packets in for OCS. And so we were going on the premise that Captain Norwood, our commander, had said, we are going to continue to advance careers. And then Bryan and I submit our packets, and we got a big fat no, which I know was Bryan, for me, that was a big defining moment. I'm like, I'm not sure I want to continue to stay in the military. I may not want to ever become an officer, like if it's just not meant to be, because I just got lied to my face. So that specific incident, Bryan, but then follow that up with, like, how many opportunities did you feel after that where you might have stayed in had you had a better support group around you?
Well, what's really interesting is what's sort of a little bit defining moment. When I first joined the military, my recruiter was like, "Would you like to go OCS? I can get you an OCS slot." And I said, no, I think I'll be a far better officer if I'm enlisted first. And so I had a long-term plan for the military past my enlisted years. And if I'm not mistaken, Joe, I think you got back to Germany before I did, and you guys were already pushing our packets along, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly. Yep. And so it was already in the works. And I remember Lieutenant Colonel Caniano, he called me into his office and he was upset. And I really appreciated that. He said, Bryan, I don't know why they turned you down. Because everything here is excellent, and I just don't know what to tell you. A lot of it came to timing, because I know there was like a downsizing in the military. Nobody does it anymore. But back in the mid '90s, late '90s, there was a downsizing. I think that was probably a contributing factor. But yeah. So that was my career was. That's where my intention was, but just never went there.
Well, and the irony to all that is I never wanted to be an officer, period. I wanted to stay enlisted the whole time.
Interesting.
And I kind of got, I don't want to say pushed. And, one of my buddies was going to warrant officer school. He kind of pushed me into going to warrant officer. I made E7 in 10 years.
That's fast.
So, I was moving up pretty quick. And, but he kind of, convinced me to go. And to be honest, the first couple of days I was trying to get hurt. So I would get kicked out of warrant officer school without having to quit, because I didn't want to quit. Obviously I wasn't going to quit. That wasn't the environment I came from, but I didn't want it so bad that I was kind of hoping I would get hurt during the PT phase of it or something where I would be able to bow out gracefully. And that didn't happen. In fact, the guy that convinced me to go ended up getting hurt during the PT phase, and he got recycled. so I guess it just wasn't in the cards for me not to be.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Joe, and I don't want to get back to 902nd time, but I, for a while, considered going over to Delta or Special Forces or even over to the SEALs because I can swim all right. And I just could never wrap my head around. I already had a very good job when I was allowed to do it. And I just was like there wasn't a lot of impetus. I can see, like, if you're artillery, you're like, I got to get the fuck out of here. But being counterintelligence, yeah, okay, I could become an officer, but is that an upgrade? I'm not going to be able to do the work. I'm just going to become a manager. I could go try to become a Green Beret, but I'm already doing this incredible, when I got to do it, doing this incredible work. Did you have the same kind of thing where you thought about maybe going towards becoming a long tabber, or were you pretty happy with the job that you had once you had the warrant officer thing done and figured out? So
it was kind of strange because when I got back from Germany, I actually got hired on by DIA. And so I had the opportunity I worked in direct support of all the Tier 1 units.
Uh-huh.
So I had a pretty interesting career, at least on the back end of it, because I spent 4 years just really working with, war fighters at the pointy end of the spear. All the guys I supported were in special ops. I supported that whole community, and I did it as a warrant officer and a counterintelligence guy because they have as big, if not larger, support apparatus in place for those guys than they do for, tactical units. So, I mean, it really is a big machine that goes out to support all the Tier 1 units.
Interesting. Sounds like an excellent job.
It was amazing. The first time I was ever in CIA headquarters, here I was, a guy that grew up on the streets in D.C. and went to public school in D.C. Mm-hmm. And, I'm walking down the halls of the CIA unescorted, It was such a humbling experience for me. But to be able to be around those war fighters, I mean, so you had to earn respect from those guys, yes. Right? I mean, those Tier 1 guys, you really have to earn their respect. But once you do, it's almost like you're a part of the team. I mean, I had an opportunity, believe it or not, I had interviewed for a position with Delta as a CI guy. And at the time, Brian, you'll remember this. I was going to school a lot when I was in Germany. And at one point, I thought I wanted to be a college professor. So I was actually pushing to get my PhD.
I thought that's where you'd wind up.
Well, that's what I wanted to do. And I got down to, I went to the psych interview to become a support guy for Delta. And I didn't get in. And the reason why I didn't get in is because the psych thought that I was so committed to school that I wouldn't be as committed to the job. And they needed someone that was going to be 150% committed to the job. That I would have been, but he thought that I was so distracted by school because I was working on my degrees that I wouldn't be a good fit. And that's the reason why I never got in. But yeah, they have a large support machine behind all of the Tier 1 units.
Sure.
Yeah.
And when I had, like I said, as a DIA guy, I worked directly with those guys.
That makes a lot of sense. It's funny because our job is one of those jobs that is pretty special. It is hard to do. And you're right, Joe. I've worked with a lot of Tier 1 guys. I've been through my share of murder boards, and typically what happens is just no one has any questions when I'm done because I know my shit. But if you don't know your shit, if you're not squared away, you don't last long. Your gear ends up in the hallway and you go to a different team or a different assignment because they just can't afford to have you around.
Right.
It's fascinating that we all have this thing where, like, our job is so special. It is like you do get attached to Delta or to DIA doing any number of things or whatever it is. How did you build up your chops to know how to do it? Because I know when Brian and I went to the schoolhouse, it's just familiarization. Like they teach you a lot of things and a lot of variety of topics. Heck, when we went through, we hand wrote with pencil, and I'm sure you guys did the same thing, all the boilerplate for a report, and, did all of this like investigation stuff that was really geared more towards potentially catching a spy in a criminal case as opposed to field collection. We spent very little time on that stuff. How did you figure out how to do what you do, or were you more of an operations guy where you helped the collectors go collect more?
I think I was more, at least when I was with you guys, I was more operational. I was the S3 kind of guy, the guy that could get you into a place and could support you. And I have to tell you that in many cases, I learned on the job. So when I first got to Darmstadt, I had never worked a PSI case, right? And so we were doing PSIs in Germany. I had never done that. And so here I was, a W-1. I get into a field office, the Darmstadt field office, and I told the guys, I said, look, I don't know how to go out and do subject interviews and all that stuff. So they had to actually teach me. Now I think I like to say I'm a quick learner. So I learned pretty quickly, but they had to teach me. And the same was true working with special operators. If you've never been in that environment before, the schoolhouse doesn't prepare you for that.
No, it does
So
not.
it really is about, it's about them, the special operation community, giving you an opportunity to learn something new, which they did. When they thrust me in that situation and I had to learn, it came down to how quickly can you learn this business, because, this is real world, state of the art, pointy end of the spear kind of stuff. And so in many cases it was learned on the job.
I just had to step out for a second just now, so I missed a tiny bit of that conversation. But I wanted to add, though, I was recruited by Delta twice.
What happened?
It was at the very last 2 or 3 months I was at Bragg, and they said, look, we're really, really looking for some, tactical intel guys. And there's just not a lot of, as Joe's point, not a lot of airborne CI guys. Well, I don't know. I was probably one of 10, and I was just on their radar. That's all. And so they just, a couple of days, I'd get another letter saying you need to report to this. And my commander would be like, I don't know what it is. You got to go. And I'd go down there. And they'd make me sit and watch this movie for like 2 hours. And then some guy, it was like a fraternity thing. They'd come over and be like, well, we'd really like you in the fraternity, see how you stack up. It was like a whole recruitment thing. And I said, well, let me think about it, because they wanted a minimum 6-year commitment. And I was down to my, last 5 or 6 weeks. That's a pretty tough sell.
Yeah.
Right.
That's it. If you got 2 or 3 years left, that's another thing, but yeah.
I was in the field. The first time they approached me, I was in the field. We were on an EDRI, and we, an evaluated field exercise and all that. We were in the field, and I get a call saying, hey, you need to be at such and such a hotel tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And so they brought me out of the field, sent me home, get cleaned up to meet these guys at a hotel somewhere the next day. Yeah, it was. They were no joke. If they were interested in you. Yep.
The order came from the top.
It was. Yeah. And everybody reacted. But like I said, I had an opportunity to do some pretty fascinating stuff, especially towards the end of my career. And so, and actually it carried on even into Social Security, because back in 2012, I guess it was, Clapper was the DNI at the time. And what he realized is that although there are 17 agencies that are part of the intel community, they get a lot of support from what they call non-Title 50 agencies. So you have, HHS or EPA. So you have all these different outside agencies that contribute to the intel mission, but they're not a part of the intel community. Mm-hmm. So what he did was he sent a letter to 26 departments and agencies back in 2012 and said, hey, I want you to appoint someone as the federal senior intelligence coordinator for your agency that can represent you with the DNI. Wow. So it was 26 agencies had to appoint a person, and I was the guy for SSA. So we had a body that would meet with the DNI regularly to talk about issues that, they needed some help with. And in fact, the last 8 months that I was still with SSA, I became the co-chair of this group of people. Yeah, it was a pretty fascinating career, I have to admit.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, your form of fascinating is completely different than mine. I was better, Joe, this might not surprise you, but I was better at being with the military than in it. You know, like my brand of candor. I don't know if you recall this, but like Bryan and I would do everything at headquarters. So just for the audience sake, when Bryan and I first got assigned to Germany, our first assignment, they put us in what's called headquarters, and we were all counterintelligence agents, but we didn't get to do that kind of work. We got to do work like clean the stoves or rearrange the Connex or trim the shrubs. That was like one of our main jobs. I still to this day remember Bryan mowing our tiny little bit of grass with the push mower, eye protection and hearing protection, just to kind of mock the system, because that's what was required. Yes. But despite that, Bryan and I were excellent, soldiers. We self-developed. We did PT great. We shot straight, and we just could not find a way to advance within our unit because, our peers who were out in the field who were not good at PT, not great shooters, didn't look like great soldiers, they were getting promoted, and Bryan and I would look at each other like, what the fuck is going on? It's
right.
You go from that to, Joe, I'm advising brigade commanders as a field collector on the ground as a civilian, and he's changing the entire focus of the brigade based upon my intel. Like how in the world did that happen? And then why in the world did the military let me go if I was able to do that one day? But like you said, sometimes the leadership kind of weeds out the bad folks, but also weeds out the other folks that really could do something good.
Here's the irony of it, too. Even when I was in the infantry, it seemed like the people that were able to get ahead in life were the slugs. Mm-hmm. And so what I mean by that is if a guy couldn't shoot good, especially in the infantry, he couldn't shoot good, he couldn't read a map good, he couldn't do PT well, he ended up being in the rear. So when we were in the field, he was in the rear. Well, when he was in the rear, he was taking classes, he was going to promotion boards, he was doing all the stuff we couldn't do because we were in the field.
Right.
So this is the guy that's moving on in life. And so it really is an unfair system when it comes to that, because the guys that were, going to Ranger school and going to Recondo school and going to, air assault school, they weren't getting college credits. They weren't getting the advancements that you needed to get promoted.
Yeah.
And so they ended up getting screwed. And so, the system is flawed when it comes to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go back to your time at the 902nd. You said in Turkey. What was that like? So
I can't talk much about what the mission was. It was a 1-year short tour, and I was there during the same time as the first Gulf War kicked off. And it was I was the only CI guy on station, and my job was to make sure that everybody that came on station, in order to be on station, you had to have a TSSCI. But the problem is that we had people that were coming straight out of basic over to the station, and it was only a 1-year short tour. So back in the late 80s, it was a year-long wait to get an SCI clearance.
Right.
So I was when I got to the station, we had people that were literally, like you were talking about, in headquarters company, trimming bushes. They couldn't do their job because they didn't have an SCI clearance. So the average wait time back then was about 8 months. So when I got on station, what I had to do was turn that around so that people would end up getting their clearances and they could go to work sooner. Yeah. So by the time I left, the turnaround time for people getting on station was about 2 weeks.
Wow.
I took it from 8 months to 2 weeks. I ended up with an MSM coming out of that 1-year short tour because I was able to get done what nobody else had been able to get done.
Well, how did you get that done?
So there was an opportunity.
Why do you ask the tough questions? Why do you ask
Well, there was a little known opportunity in the reg 380-67, I guess at the time, that said the commander could grant an interim clearance. And if the commander granted an interim clearance, CCF at the time, the Central Clearance Facility, could actually grant interim access. But nobody had ever attempted to use that, take that opportunity. So what I did was I made some calls to CCF, and I said, look, if you let me go off of lax and max, if you let me take your initial investigations and make a determination for the commander that this person is okay to be cleared, will you accept that? And they said, sure. So the people would get on station, they would in process. I'd get a list of names. I called back to CCF, give them the list of names, and then 2 days later, these people were getting read on. And it was simply a loophole that nobody had taken advantage of that I was able to pick up on.
Yeah. Yeah. And now you got people to actually go out and do the job.
And at the time, the other thing that I ended up doing is back then, computers needed to be accredited based on whatever level that they were processing at. Because this was before you guys even knew what a computer was. It's when you had those floppy disks. You had a program disk that you had to put in, and it would boot up the computer. And you took out that 5.5-inch floppy or whatever it was, and you put in your program floppy. So we had those kind of computers back then. And so I ended up having to accredit all the computers on the field station. And I got it done in like 3 months. So the problem was I was bored. I had nothing else to do. So, I was working, 24/7. There was nowhere to go and nothing to do. It was a field station in Sinop, Turkey, and we could hardly ever go into town. So it was a real small facility. The biggest thing that we had going on in the facility is softball. And Bryan will tell you I'm not a big sports guy, even though he gave me a Boston Red Sox hat. But right. we had 7 clubs on this. It was only like 400 people on the field station. We had 7 clubs.
Wow.
That's a lot.
A lot. And so the motto was, if you're not an alcoholic when you got to the field station, you'd be an alcoholic by the time you left.
Yeah, how did you guys keep your clearances? Holy shit.
Joe doesn't drink.
Nothing to do with alcohol.
It was pretty interesting. But I don't think the field station exists anymore. But if you know anything about field station Augsburg, or some of those other field stations that were in Germany, you have some idea of what the mission was.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I was going to say, Joe doesn't drink, so he'd probably be pretty safe. I don't recall you ever drinking, Joe. You never.
Yeah, I drink.
You drink?
So check this out. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't think I've ever seen you take a drink before.
That's weird.
That's not.
But I drink beer. I drink beer.
All right.
Yeah. The crazy part is when I got there, I was in E6. And they had a NCO club. Well, in the NCO club, you didn't have to buy drinks as you went. You paid a monthly
oh my God
membership fee, and it was on an honor system. So you go in, you had a key to get in the place. You went in there 24 hours, 7 days a week. You get a beer. You put a little tick mark on the card for every beer you got. At the end of the month, they would tally it all up, and they'd send you a bill, and you'd pay your bill. So it was the place was nuts, man. It was
you would be an alcoholic there. That's
When I first got there, I got there like in July. I get to the place and they had this big party going on, and almost every weekend there was a big party, cookout, and that kind of stuff. So I go out and I'm on the tennis court. They got the music blaring, everybody's doing this dance. And a part of the dance is you had to do a certain step, and then you reach down, get your beer and drink. You go back to dancing, you reach down, get your beer and drink. So there's this one guy out there, and he's just tearing it up, man. He's partying, he's doing the dance perfect. I said, "Who's that guy?" They said,
"It was Narmy."
I said, "Who's that guy?" They said, "It's the chaplain."
Oh my God. I was really hoping you guys Army, but
yeah, it was a freaking chaplain. So that lets you know what kind of place it was, man. It was incredible.
So after that, you became an E7. So where did you go next?
So when I left there, I went back to Bragg, and I was with 2nd Battalion, 7th Special Forces Group. So I spent a year with 7th Group as a counterintelligence guy. So what SF guys do is when they deploy, when they come out of the field, they get debriefed. And their debriefs go into what they call the SODAR system, or at least it was at the time, Special Operations Recovery System or whatever. So what I would end up doing is deploying with the A teams, but I would stay in garrison. They would go into the field, do what they needed to do their SR missions or whatever they were doing. And when they came out, because what they didn't want them to do is have to wait until they got back to Bragg to get debriefed, because you forget stuff. So the moment they would come out of the field, they would come to me, and I would sit there and debrief them, and then write up the reports and put it in the SODAR system.
And when you're debriefing these guys, I don't want to ask you specifics, obviously, but how often is something generated where you're like, oh, that's notable, or is a lot of this stuff just kind of like for the record? Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it. How often is something generated where you're like, oh, that's notable, or is a lot of this stuff just kind of like for the record?
Yeah, a lot of this stuff is real. We were going into places like, because 7th Group has got Central America. So we were going into, some places like Honduras and Panama and other places that I can't really talk about. But they would go into places and do. So SF guys are a little bit different because they do some humanitarian missions. I don't know if you guys know, but they actually go in and they go in and they build field hospitals, or they'll go in and build a system where people can now purify their water. So they have engineers that go in and do some of these, real special humanitarian missions. But while they're in those places, they actually observe things, obviously, right? And so when they come out, they get debriefed about those things that they saw while they were in, doing these humanitarian missions. And so my job would be to debrief them on things that may have been of an intelligence matter and they may have observed while they were in country.
And did you get a chance at all to go out with them and do any just passive collection or any kind of just familiarization with them in the field?
The only time I really got to go out with them was in Honduras. And mostly because we were in town. It was on civilian clothes missions and that kind of stuff, but we were actually in town in Honduras, and it was pretty sketchy. So those guys travel with live ammo. I'm sure you're aware of that. Some of the standoffs that have been in hotels and stuff, but they have what they call force protection ammunition. So it was many times that we had to lock and load because things weren't, looking too good for us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, so and then following your time with 7th Group, where did you go after that?
So from 7th Group, I went to Warrant School, and from there I went to Germany. How
would you characterize your time with the 165th? I mean, I know that at least for me, pre-deployment training was a waste of my time. We didn't cover shit. That we watched this stupid winter driving video over and over again, and apparently nobody in ops could keep track of that fucking thing. They're like, oh, do you remember this, Brian? Oh, we lost a roster. I guess today we're going to watch the winter driving film. So it was like, okay, we're not really taking this, like, we get the brief, everybody's going to die, before we deploy, and then we don't train like we fought at all. We just made shit up, man. How do you characterize that time?
I guess it was a little different for me because I was a brand new warrant officer, right? I got there as a W-1. I think had I gotten there as an NCO, I probably would have had a worse time than I did when I got there as a warrant, because I think I got treated a little bit differently. But I had some opportunities. Like I was an S2 for a year, then I worked in Echo Company for a year. So for me, it was a great learning experience because, like I said, I'd never been in a unit where I wore civilian clothes before. So here I was doing a PSI mission. So I learned the PSI mission. I didn't know that. I got to, deal with Echo Company and some of the things they were doing, some of the recon missions that they were, at least training for. And then I got the opportunity to work in operations. And when I did, and Brian can attest to this, we were actually working with the DIA guys and others when we were in Bosnia. So the G2X was next door to us. So we were around those guys, and actually we supported the DIA guys. Brian, if you remember, they met us in Germany, and then they ended up going downtown and living. Mm-hmm. And so the second time when I was with DIA, I actually got to go to some of those platforms that we had set up as tactical guys, because the DIA guys were actually living on the economy. So I think it was a little different for me because of, being new to the Warrant Officer Corps. And I do think there was a lot of wasted time. I don't know if you remember, but I spent a lot of time at Grafenwehr and Hohenfels, mm-hmm. because none of the other warrant officers would go to the field. So when they had these units training to go to Bosnia and where was the other place we ended up going into?
Montenegro.
Kosovo.
Oh, Kosovo. Okay.
So when we had people training, because we had never dealt with a situation, they started calling the civilians on the battlefield. So we had never trained with civilians on the battlefield. So we had started doing that in Hohenfels, and they needed intel evaluators to, say, are we doing a good job on how we deal with the local populace? And none of the other warrants would go to the field. And so it was like, you got to be freaking kidding me. These guys hated going to the field. So because I spent 10 years at Bragg, the field was nothing to me. So I was like, sure, I'll go to the field. And so because I volunteered all the time, I spent a lot of time at Hohenfels, Grafenbeer. Yeah, it was it was a little bit different for me.
I've actually got to peel away off this conversation, but I wanted to let Joe know that he was one of the best parts of my military career.
Wow.
If I had to pick a mentor or someone I knew would take care of me at all times, it was always Joe. Joe got a bad reputation for being gruff. I don't know what it came from. I thought he was about the nicest guy I ever met. I think people in general were a little intimidated by him, probably because he had a deep voice there. And Joe was always there for me. He was a hugely positive thing for me in my life, especially as like a mentor and like showing me how it's done. And he really took good care of us. I just want to say, Joe, I had talked to you for a while, and I just wanted to let you know how much I appreciated that.
Well, I appreciate that sentiment. And so for me, you made a significant impact on my life as well. I remember Pete, all I read was self-help books, and I wasn't into the arts or sports and it was Bryan in Bosnia that said, dude, you need to be more well-rounded. So he would bring in the sports page every day, and he would read the stats from the baseball game. I had no idea what he was reading to me, but he would read the stats. And from that day on, I actually changed my life around those comments, and I actually started doing things outside of just self-help. So when I got back here, we bought tickets to the Ravens. I bought a boat. So you really were that much of an inspiration to me that I changed the way I was doing business because of the impact you had on me.
Wow.
I appreciate that, Joe. Wow. I like that. Yeah. Oh, hey, I got one thing I got to end on here before I take off. Okay. So I get deployed to Bosnia twice. I'm not sure, Joe, you only went once, right?
Well, I only went once with the 165th. Yes. Yeah.
And I wound up going with, when I went up to Fort Bragg, as soon as I got to Fort Bragg, they sent me to Bosnia. So Pete, I don't know if you remember, but I was stationed with Joe in Ops, and we built our own little trailer. It was me, Joe, Mr. Narmi, and Phil Kurtz. Phil didn't know which way to hit the nail, but we put this little trailer all together, and it actually came out pretty nice. And I got kind of the bug in my head while we were out there, and I built a little picnic table. I don't know if you guys remember this.
Yes.
Yep, I remember it.
It was some of the funniest times when people's reaction. I remember Captain Captain Norwood came by to scream at me about the picnic table, about how it makes us look like we're a bunch of civilians and we're just here playing around, and it laid into me pretty good. And then I think I want to say maybe a minute later was Caniano. He came by and he goes, geez, that's a hell of a picnic table. Who made that? And is there any way I could get one of those? And when I went back there on my second deployment, it was still there.
Nice.
Really?
Yeah, 2 years later, or a year and a half later, it was still there. They'd moved it around.
Wow.
It was had a lot more, logos dug into it at that point. But you could still sit on it. It would still work just fine. Not a bit of primer or anything on to keep that thing safe. But it still stuck around. Not too bad.
Wow, nice.
That's your contribution to CI.
That was it. That was it.
Brian, it's great talking to you. When do you guys actually start the row?
Right now there's three of us. We're looking for a fourth rower. So we get some pretty fast guys. I don't know if Pete told you, but I did this row once before.
I followed you on your blog.
Oh, right. So we're looking to break the record this time. So I got an Olympic rower and I got the world champion paddleboarder from Brazil. And we're looking at a couple of other like top rowers to like really make a fast boat. But we haven't found that big sponsor yet. But we're hoping to push off from Spain in December of 2020.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
well, keep me posted.
You got a while before you can, see if I drown or not.
Brian, thanks for joining in with this. I love doing these things, man, and I really appreciate you hanging with us. Let me wrap up with Joe, but you take care, and then we'll just do another one in a little bit.
All right, take care, my friend.
Take care.
Take care, my friend.
Take care. All right, bye-bye, guys.
Bye-bye. I want to give you the opportunity to ask me some questions too, because we do come from the field, and this, I want to make sure that this isn't just about me asking you questions. Do you have anything you want to ask me?
I guess my curiosity is how did you get into this?
Into the podcast thing? When I came back from Afghanistan in 2012, I was tired of, you'll probably recognize this. I was tired of threat and death and destruction and just the frustrations of fighting the organization to get it out of its own way. I mean, God's honest truth is the best intel I collected was on how we responded to the external environment. If I could get all of us to calm the fuck down and do less damage, we did a lot better off. So I was sick of that, but I wanted to tell these stories because I've been on as many combat patrols as anybody. And so my friend had a radio show and I talked my way onto that and I just stayed. And then the radio, it was like a community radio thing. They basically kicked us out. They're like, hey, you guys got to go do something bigger. You guys are on your way to something else. So in a positive way, they pushed us out the door and said, go do it. And this is what it became. But ultimately, this is just me going out on combat patrols and writing a field report and telling the commander what I think,
Wow. Nice. I'm impressed. I found out you were doing it through Eric Kleinsmith. He and I haven't kept in close contact with him, but I talked to him and he told me immediately about the fact that, you were doing this. So I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, man, it's a great adventure. And it really is like, instead of being focused on lethality, I'm focused on life and enrichment and just, giving perspective to folks, because I've seen enough conflict. And one of the big things that I try to do is try to find what's reasonable. I don't got to agree with you, but if I can understand where you're coming from, and if I can do that in Afghanistan, then I can probably do it here in the States. And so that's sort of one of my guiding lights.
What I find the difficulty being, and one thing being in the Army taught me is that we do a disservice to our community by not having a draft, in my opinion, or some kind of conscription, right? Where you have to serve your country somehow for, a minimum of 2 years.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because we have a perspective on life that 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 generations have never experienced, right? I mean, if it wasn't for guys like you and I and Brian that just said, hey, I'm going to go do this thing, the further we get from 9/11, the less volunteerism we have, right? So we have this complete segment of society that it just feels entitled to stuff, right? And so they've never seen the Afghanistans or something as simple as Panama, where they don't have paved streets, right? Yeah. So we take so much for granted in this country, and then we have a nerve to complain about stuff, right? We have a complete part of our society. I don't know what your position is on burning the flag, but not burning the flag, but kneeling during the national anthem. But I got to tell you, when I started going to Ravens games, it was many times I was in the stands and guys had their hats on when the national anthem played. And in the beginning, I used to get upset about that, right? I mean, to the point that I was ready to fight. But then I realized that's why I served.
Yeah.
So you would have the opportunity to do, I don't care how stupid it is or how much I don't like it, you still have the right to do it. And so we have 2 or 3 generations that have never served. They have no idea what patriotism means, but they got opinions. Everybody has an opinion. And so that's what really pisses me off is that political, they weaponize people kneeling during the national anthem and they never even asked. In fact, apparently when he first started doing it, he consulted a veteran to find out what the right thing to do was. And a veteran told him what to do. But then these politicians turn around and weaponize this thing. It's stuff like that that just rubs me raw. That we have an entire society of people that have no idea what it's like to wake up in a freaking foxhole in Afghanistan, right? And so if you want to have an opinion, it's just like voting, right? You can't have an opinion if you don't go to the polls. And so if you don't serve, I think you lose some of your right to bitch if you've never been, in a situation where your life is in danger.
Yeah, and also seeing what it's like to really actually struggle, right? Like those unpaved streets in Panama and, a valley that has no electricity, none, not
right.
even a generator, maybe a solar-powered porch light, maybe, but truly Stone Age living,
I can bring it closer. When I was in E6 at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where the cost of living is dirt cheap, I was in E6 with one kid, and I qualified for freaking food stamps.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That we have soldiers out there that are living in freaking poverty, and they still wake up every morning and put on their gear and go out and defend this damn country. That's what that just rubs me raw.
Yeah.
When we would deploy, we went into what they call a tax-exempt status.
Yeah.
If I could be tax-exempt while I'm deployed, why shouldn't I be tax-exempt while I'm not deployed? It's just ridiculous how we treat people.
Yeah.
And let's not even talk about the VA, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I try to give those guys all of the benefit of the doubt that I can, but they definitely take all of the advantage of that graciousness. It's important, like so the guy who talked to Colin Kaepernick about kneeling, that guy's been on the show. He's become a friend of mine, through doing the podcast. And he sees this the same way as you. He's like, look, you can't just sit on the bench. You have to be with your team. And I'll stand behind you when you're there. I won't kneel, but I'll render my own form of salute. But I definitely defend your right to do it. And I think all of us, we may not like it, but there's all kinds of ways. Like if you want to burn the flag, I don't like that, but I love the freedom that you get to do it. I love that it affords me the right to do something that I want to do. So I've got to take some of that, but there is a thing in service. There is a thing in seeing when life is truly hard and dangerous, to appreciate
right.
what we do have here and to get fucking along better. You don't want to talk about, people want to talk about 3 parties, 4 parties. Iraq's got 50 plus parties. And guess what? None of those fuckers get along because none of them ever get what they want. None of them.
Right. Right. It was the same way in Bosnia. It was 3 warring factions, right? But
yeah.
Because when one guy was in charge and he was treating them all the same and the whole, heavy fist over them, everything was fine.
Yeah.
But once they had to try to get along, that's when war broke out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's freaking ridiculous, man. That people, it's the 21st century, man, and we can't figure out how to get along.
Yeah.
That to me is ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. It is really ridiculous. It is. Yeah, it turns out a guy like Tito really had a lot of importance in maintaining peace in the world.
That's right. So did Saddam Hussein, if you think about it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, I don't agree with how he did business, but he did maintain, some stability and peace in that region.
Yeah. Yeah. So you did a lot of things in your career, and you got bigger and bigger on the ops side. I always stayed kind of on the ground, tactical side. I have the things that I wish I could have gotten into. What did you not get to that you wish you could have done?
I wanted to be a drill sergeant.
Oh, you would have been good at that.
So it's 2 things I wanted to do that I never got to do. One was be a drill sergeant, and one was go to Ranger School. So when I was in Echo Company, I was in the best shape of my life. I was running faster than I ever could. So, and I actually had a slot to go to Ranger School. And the first sergeant came to me and said, he said, Chief, you're on the back end of your career. Some of these guys need Ranger School to get promoted. Would you give up your slot to one of these guys that really needs it? And I ended up giving up my slot to him.
Wow.
That was the one school that I really, really wanted to go to was Ranger School.
Yeah.
And I gave up the opportunity because there were people out there that were much more deserving to go.
I did something similar as I was winding down my Army career in the active Army. You remember Nancy Richards ended up becoming my boss at Huachuca after Bosnia.
Really?
Yeah, she was there just ahead of me. And so I ended up as an E4 because I couldn't get fucking promoted in that damn unit. I I was the 2 for all of the 309th MI battalion, which, as you know, is like brigade sized. So
Right.
I had a crazy job where I had, 100 buildings that I had some security management accountability over, and 5,000 people, and it was crazy. So she's like, I'm going to get you out of there at some point, spend a year there, learn how to do that job. And then I went over and I worked in the SIFSO course, the source operation course for the audience, which actually was the perfect for a guy that had just come back from a deployment running actual sources. The Army never designs these things well. They happen by accident.
Right.
She said to me, she's like, I think what we should do with your career is get you promoted to E6, get the Army to pay for a master's degree, and then get out and go do something else, because I want you, you don't really need to be here. You're kind of behind the promotion wave, and that's always going to frustrate you. And because my plan to get to E6 was just to have, at the time, we promoted on points. This is for my friends listening. And the max you could have was 800. And I just figured the numbers would be like 798 when they wanted to shut off promotion. And so I was just going to max out the system. And she's like, that's not the way to think about these things. You need to go find something else. It was great advice. I got the master's degree. I got out and I did other things. But I always wondered a little bit about drill sergeant, but I really wanted to get that one strategic assignment in so I could go out and sip some coffee and collect in that fashion instead of like the frantic, fast-paced tactical style.
Right. Well, and I had that opportunity, like I said, my last assignment with DIA, it was that type of an assignment, but it was high stress, high pace because I was supporting tier 1 guys. So that was the only real strategic job that I had in 20 years. I only did 4 years strategic. And I think when I joined the Army, my drill sergeant said, hey, you can do whatever you want. Your GT score is high enough.
Yeah.
So the guy that actually talked me into going into the Army said, do the hardest thing you can do up front. He said, and then my recruiter said, yep, you ought to do the hardest thing you can do up front. So when you get one of those cush jobs at the end of your career, you don't know how to appreciate it. And that was the best advice he could have given me. And so I started out airborne infantry and ended up working with tier 1 guys in a strategic assignment. So it was a great prelude or a great ending to a pretty tough career.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate how you do it and how you did it. And I appreciate the heck out of being able to do this with all of us and, just illustrate what the espionage world looks like for us guys who go out and do it. You don't know what you're doing. You have to figure it out on the job all the time. Maybe you have a mentor. Maybe you have a shitty boss. Either way, the mission's still got to get done. And getting a chance to illustrate that, man, I know that I know that people are interested in it. They love to hear these stories and to hear the just how different and how challenging that world is.
Yeah. And, one of the things that you may want to, and I'm not trying to tell you how to do your business, maybe it would, if some of your listeners could send in some questions to us about things that they would like to hear about, and maybe we could, focus at least one of the podcasts on responding to some of the questions they may have.
Yeah. That's a great idea because between my field time and then all of the stuff that you did over an entire career, I mean, there's a lot of answers there. And maybe even get some of the technical guys in, the bug sweeping guys, the lie detecting guys, and have them talk too, because that's a whole different world within our world. It's a crazy thing. Well, listen, I appreciate you doing this with me. Thanks for taking an hour.
Yes, sir.